I don't know what it is. And I have zoomed in on that tighter. When you, yeah, it's a 4th of July celebration.
Well, welcome everybody. The Historic Advisory Committee's speaker series, we're very pleased to have Dave Bruinix here. You're the head of the Board of Trustees for the Quaker Meetinghouse, and we'll be talking about the Quaker Meetinghouse in Farmington.
Thank you for having me. I grew up in Victor, went to Victor schools. I actually grew up in Pumpkin Hook, graduated from Victor. My wife's grandmother was a Victor teacher for over 50 years, Leola Poppenhusen, for any of you that graduated from Victor. I see a look of fear in your eyes. The 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse is what we're going to talk about today. It's taken a lot of time and a lot of people in different organizations to get to where we are today, from our various board members and volunteers to national level organizations. We started with a building that most people would look at and say, no, something's wrong with you people. If you look at the far end of the building, where it was just after Allen Padgham Road on County Road 8, just off the apex of the curve. And what happened was a lady came around the curve a little too wide and took out one of the front posts. And then shortly after, there was a big windstorm, which this picture doesn't show it well. Some of the ones later on, you'll see the front of the building is actually laying on the ground. But timber frame, mortise and tenon buildings are compartmentalized. So just because one bay is bad doesn't mean the rest of the building is. And so where we were looking in each of the other sections, it was in good shape. Just the siding was bad. And a couple other little parts, like the roof. My brother and I actually climbed up on here, cabled it, and put 2-inch by 20-foot poles in the ground and kept the building from tipping over with come-alongs. We were stepped a little gingerly as we went across the roof. I'm older, so I let him go first. Lots and lots and lots of various people have helped us work through this. Like I said before, within this picture, scouts, town officials, you name it. What I'll talk about today is the past, the present, and what we're doing in the future with it. Thomas Jefferson, when you read the Declaration of Independence, the concept behind it is all men are created equal. We all have the right to life, liberty, and he changed it to pursuit of happiness. It was property. Historically, it hasn't always been our national policy to follow for everybody. Quakers, over time, developed the idea that everybody actually is and should be equal in the eyes of the Lord and in man himself. In Christ, neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. Everybody is equal in the eyes of God. And with that, social action came up. They began to work in your equal rights movements. I was a 7th grade social studies teacher. I never believed it was my place to put my religious views, my political views out for the kids. That's their family's job. But when you're teaching the abolitionist movement, women's rights, all of that, they're all Quaker-driven programs. They obviously didn't know I had been raised Quaker, so while I'm teaching this and telling them it was a Quaker movement, I'm hearing all the oatmeal jokes. I'm like, if you only knew, I'll get you, kid. Upstate New York. This area we're in right here is the hotbed for civil rights movements. You don't think as Farmington, Pumpkin Hook, Victor area as a national center for equal rights, but it really, really was. What we're going to go? Why is this place so important? What happened to it? You got a little preview of it. And what are we moving forward with? The architecture of this building. It's a fairly common design for the large-scale Quaker meeting houses. There are some down in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts that look just like this building. It's big, 60 by 46 feet. And that's a very big building. And as I'll cover later, it's been moved twice. So to pick up a building that big, as far as we know, it's the largest pre-Erie Canal building still standing in Western New York. For a while, barely standing, but it's up. Finest white wood is what we get out of the documents. Played around with that a little bit. I have some friends that have a lot more knowledge of various woods. That could be almost any wood that's not dark. So poplar is the most common one they would think of as white wood, but you wouldn't use poplar for framing and structural. It's more of a softer wood. Chestnut was the predominant hardwood around here. A lot of our beams are made out of that, and pretty much whatever good-sized straight tree was in the woods near the meeting house and the sawmill. The 1816 is almost like a franchise headquarters for Quakers. If you go around all the various little towns, most Quaker meeting houses are going to be more like the size of a one-room schoolhouse, give or take a little bit. And this is their yearly meeting site. So it's big enough where the membership from all 25 meetings in this area could come to it. So like the franchisees, it wasn't a franchise system, but could come and meet at headquarters. I always like this guy right here in the back of the picture. He appears in a bunch of our photos. He's got a silver top hat. It's the only one I've ever noticed. And you spend too much time looking at some of these old pictures sometimes, because what we're looking at a lot of times is the architectural details, but you get looking at some of them. This guy, I can't think of his name right now. He's the ancestor of one of our board members, and he's got a really special beard. It's only on his neck, and it goes all the way around his head. It looks like he has a lion's mane. So just the things I pick up on. Erie Canal was the driving force and change in this area. It's what brought the population in. It brought commerce. And with the population growth, it brought in a lot of people traveling along the canal. It became the burned over district. If you look at all the various religions, churches that started in this area, Mormonism, spiritualism, and so on, Quakerism started in England. That's not part of the burned over, but it was strong in this region. But along with the people looking for change in their life came the movement for equal rights. African Americans, Native Americans, women's rights. And it's not just through religion, it's everyday life. They should have equality. Jimmy Johnson, Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott, especially Frederick and Lucretia, are very well known, and they're very, very connected to our meeting house. One of the lesser known connections to our meeting house is that the Treaty of Buffalo Creek of 1838. It's one of the most crooked treaties the U.S. government ever created. The Government essentially had a removal order for the Seneca people, the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee, to be removed to Oklahoma. It had to be agreed upon by council. Well, the Seneca people were never going to agree to this in council, so the government operators created a separate group of people and called it the New Council for the Native Peoples and put their names on it, but they weren't chiefs or sachems or any of that. And it took several years, work with a group of the Quakers and the Native people especially. William Burling, he's a pretty interesting guy. He went to George Washington's inauguration. He met Thomas Jefferson. He's buried in South Farmington Cemetery. And Griffith Cooper from Williamson, if you know where Williamson High School is, he lives right next door to it, were the representatives from Genesee Early Meeting Farmington that did the most work on it. There were hundreds of Native peoples that came to this meeting house. It started out with the clan mothers that came and asked for help, then the council members, and then just very large groups of Native people. I'd love to see a picture, it's not possible, that came to this that was so important to preserve some aspect of their land. Griffith Cooper said, "We pulled the strings and the world's people danced." There is a book, I left a copy of it in the back of the room, Case of the Seneca Indians in the state of New York. I bought mine recently on Amazon for $19. It's a very small font. It gives a legal sense. It's not going to be a dramatic story with a lot of action words. This is what happened. Compromise Treaty 1842. The Allegheny, Cattaraugus homelands were retained by the Native peoples. They were not forcibly removed to Oklahoma. Tonawanda, as it says, made a separate treaty a few years later. And because of that and others, we still have Native people in New York State. I made a mistake and did not turn off my sounds. I don't want my phone to ring because I was born on Halloween and my ringtone is haunted house sounds. So that would be bad to have go off in the middle of a presentation. We do a lot of work with the people at Ganondigan. Peter and Mary Jemison have worked with us both extensively. We gave them the carrying on the vision because they have done so much to promote both groups. Underground Railroad. I look at the 1816 Meeting House as almost the local headquarters, on a national level headquarters, for the Underground Railroad. There's very little that went on anywhere in the country that doesn't connect back to this place. Austin Stewart probably helped build the 1816 building. He was a slave that lived in Maryland. His owner moved to Bath, New York, 1809-ish, 1810, somewhere in there. And New York laws, New York was phasing out slavery. Short version, his owner hired Austin out and was paid for Austin's labor, which under New York laws at the time made him a free man. The Hathaways from Farmington worked with Austin to get the legal documentation that he was now a free man. And he settled in Farmington for 3 or 4 years. And like I said, helped build it. Then he ran an African American community in Canada for a while. Then came back, lived in Canandaigua, owned a store in the city of Rochester. He's considered Rochester's first successful black businessman. He's buried in the cemetery by the Canandaigua City Hall, just past the railroad bridge everybody runs into. Frederick Douglass. looked at his speeches, his talks in this area as his training ground. When he had worked in Boston, he had huge, massive crowds that were going to get worked up. But talking to a smaller group is very different than speaking to a small crowd, to a large crowd. It taught him to learn how to put things out for people that weren't as exposed to his ideas as he would have found in Boston. Victor, he had anti-slavery fairs. A large meeting was convened in the Universalist Church of Victor. It was one of the most satisfactory anti-slavery demonstrations which I ever attended in that place. This is from Frederick Douglass. A greater willingness to listen to radical anti-slavery sentiments than I usually found in the country towns of this region. The next day, the ladies of Western New York Anti-Slavery Society held a fair in the hall of Mr. Peck's hotel. I have not been able to find where Mr. Peck's hotel was. I'm not sure. The Universalist Church is the one just up the street here. The Hathaway family, J.C. Hathaway, at a time when it was illegal, a federal offense to help a runaway slave, ran ads in the paper that he was the guy to come to help. They stayed at his house, they lived there. Just so important in the whole abolitionist movement. Recently I was getting my hair cut, and I like to go to the old Floyd the Barber type barber shops, and one of the guys that was sitting in, he goes, I have J.C. Hathaway's desk. Do you guys want it? I'm like, yeah. So he's putting together some documentation. Apparently his great-grandfather somehow was connected to the Hathaways, and it was his great-grandfather's most prized possession, and he wants to put it in with our stuff so that it's protected. Before we could accept it, I had to find a place to put. We're not ready for it with our building. So to find a climate-controlled facility that we could store it in, which I did find someone that I volunteered to store some of our stuff like that for a while. My barn is full of architectural stuff, and my brother owns some commercial properties, and now he is going to be storing some furniture. He doesn't mind. If you've ever seen or read the book Escape on the Pearl, it was a boat that was chartered to help slaves escape Maryland, Washington area. And it was supposed to take a small number of people. The night they went to take off, like 5 times what they expected. And they loaded them all, as many as they could on the boat, set sail across Chesapeake Bay, ran out of wind. And so they sat in still waters until they were captured, and everybody on board was resold into slavery, including the Edmondson sisters. They were the children of a free man and a slave mother. And that still meant they were slaves. So they were sold into the deep south, New Orleans area, and there was a yellow fever outbreak. And the owner did not want them to get sick and die and lose his investment, so he shipped them back up north. They're pretty girls. They're 13, 16 years old. They were not going to have a good life based on that. Their father reached out to manumission societies and abolitionist groups and was able to start a public relations tour. He spoke in Boston and New York City and raised enough money to buy his own children from slavery, which is pretty sad. Sure.
And
Yeah.
he paid enough money.
Henry Ward Beecher.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
As soon as they were purchased, no, I like stuff like that. As soon as they were purchased, they came to Farmington and lived up here for a little while. On North Hook Road, maybe a quarter mile south of where it ends at Victor Road. It's a house today, but it was a little schoolhouse, the Bird's Nest School it was called. My thoughts on it, it was a place where African-American children, it was illegal to teach them to read and write. So it was where they could catch up. So whether it was a child or an adult could attend there and learn to read and write. You can't just put a kid that doesn't have any literacy into a school and expect them to be successful. William Wells Brown. He is considered America's first black playwright. Very, very well published. Lived in Farmington. Escaped from slavery and settled here. Some of the other things we've been doing. Harriet and Selby Howard. This is Selby's gravestone, and this is Harriet's. Selby's stone was broken in half right there, and Harriet's was missing. I wanted to learn how to fix it, so I went to gravestone repair school, and we repaired Selby's stone. The reason it's gold in color in that picture is a National Cemeteries approved biological chemical that we put on to kill all of the lichens and other stuff. And it brings it back to color. Eventually that repair will blend in. Harriet's stone was in much worse shape. I actually excavated the first 8 inches above her grave area and sifted it with the archaeological type sifters and found pieces of the stone. It's hard to see in the PowerPoint, but it does say Harriet Howard right there. The rest of the stone, that's what the pieces looked like, and they were what's called sugared. So if you take a piece and roll it between your fingers, it just turns to powder. There's nothing you can do to preserve that. So I bought through Farmington Historical Society, actually paid for these materials, bought a bucket of powdered lithomax that's $300 for a 5-gallon bucket, built a framework, poured the mortar mix in with Harriet's stone, and then I had to learn patience, because when I pour concrete, one of my favorite parts is taking the forms off to see how you did. You have to wait a month. I don't have the attention span to wait a month for anything. And then at the end of the month, you turn it over and pour a layer on the backside, because it doesn't flow like a thin concrete, and there's little divotty things. But 2 months later, we reset the base, put it in there. We're still working on probably going to put some type of curbing around it to protect it from wild riding lawnmowers. Mark Wyman's been helping me with that. So, but it's been an interesting part of the project. I put in for a Pomeroy marker for Selby and Harriet Howard, and that should be going up pretty soon. It'll be along the Sheldon Road by the cemetery. But it talks about how they escaped from slavery and settled in Farmington. Their house burned down. Harriet was dead by then, and Selby was living on his own at the corner of Holtz and Sheldon Road. And we found some documentation that said the Woods family gave Selby a cabin on their property to live in for the rest of his life. My wife grew up in the farmhouse that the Woods owned. When the farm was sold off, I make maple syrup, and my entire sugar bush was on that farm, so I bought the sugar bush. Found a journal entry, more or less, that gave a measurement from the Orthodox Quaker Church to where Selby's cabin was, and it ended up it's on my property. So I contacted some archaeologists, and last summer we started looking. We haven't found it yet. But we did find, within 5 minutes of our initial preliminary search, we find a 1799 Spanish real in my hay lot. And it's significant because it's a pierced coin. And African Americans would often sew their coins into their clothes. So you find that within your first couple of minutes, you're like, yeah, we got this. But mostly what we found were agricultural implement pieces, parts of horse tack. It was fun though. And one of the things, there were 2 Orthodox meeting houses. One burned in 75. They built the new one in 76. The measurement's not dated. So we were thinking it was off the old one, but if it's off the new one, it's 100 yards east of where we were digging on a whole different arc. So that's another project. Women's rights. Seneca Falls Convention, 1848. It was organized by Quakers. The McClintock family were the primary organizers of the Seneca Falls, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Thomas McClintock was the clerk of Farmington Meeting. So can't get much more connected than that. Lucretia Mott, we've got documentation of at least 5 or 6 or more times where she spoke in this building. The Declaration of Sentiments was considered pretty radical. Essentially what they did is they took the Declaration of Independence and they rewrote it to include women. And it was not supposed to be a document just for white men anymore. This particular slide, every time I used it, I'd have to call Judy Wellman and who are these people? Because I could never remember their names. So this time I put their names on it. But these are all members, aside from the Stantons and Motts and Susan, that were connected to the 1816 Meeting House. Amy Post was from Rochester, a very abolitionist, women's rights. Congregational Friends formed out of a lot of this. That became a more open. There was no longer the divided meetings for male and female, a bigger focus on what can we do for other people. Practical philanthropy is what they call it. The Christians, Jews, Mohammedans, and pagans. By pagans, they're referring to the native peoples. We're all welcome based on the law of love. Elizabeth Cady Stanton spoke for women's suffrage at the in 1852 at the Meeting House. When she got done talking, it was quiet. Nobody said a word. And she thought that she had maybe offended everybody in the group. And one of the men in the audience just kind of said, well, if a hen can crow, then let her crow. And everybody started laughing. And he came up to her and said, I didn't mean to cause laughter. All I was saying was if someone can do it, then they should be allowed to do it, whether they're male or female. Susan Anthony spoke in the Orthodox. That's the one across the road from where the 1816 is. We don't have any documentation that she was ever in our building. It would be kind of odd if she wasn't, but if so far we haven't found where anybody wrote it down. So. What happened to it? Quakers left the area. A lot of them moved west, married off into other areas. The Hicksites maintained this building for a long time, but across the road was the Orthodox. And eventually, in 1927, the building was sold. This picture here, at some point I got to figure out how to make it easier to see, but I recently found this. That's the Meeting House being moved. I'd like to be able to bring out the view on the horses a little bit better. And the other one, I found two pictures. The other one is a similar shot, but there's a little toddler sitting on a piece of wood, and on the back of the picture it said, Harold Hopper watching the family move. I knew Harold as a 90-year-old guy, you know? Yeah. I played football with his kids, and Harold and my parents carpooled us back and forth, and to see him as a little kid with the meeting house being moved. But Jack Van Laer picked up the building and moved it just a couple hundred feet down the hill. Again, it's a 46 by 60 building, and he only moved it 345 feet, I think, which doesn't seem to make sense, but he was a potato farmer. And he put it right at the end of his muck fields, where you're going to be coming out with horses, with heavy loads, and to make him have to climb that hill, it would have turned into a mucky mess and been a huge issue. So he moved it down. It was very practical to do. And he, typical old Dutchman, saved everything. He moved all sorts of windows around. He raised the floor up and put it there, but there wasn't a scrap of wood that he took off the building that he didn't hide somewhere in the building. So here's a couple more images of what we started with. This pile of sticks on the ground is one entire bay of the building. It would be from about here forward, that after being hit on the corner post and then the windstorm, the town of Farmington said, this is not safe. You can't have it here. If I pulled in from the road with my truck to the pile of debris here, I had to make sure my back of my truck wasn't in the road. So they weren't wrong. We just didn't want to agree with them. So we got a whole bunch of people involved over a long period of time, and we've been working on it ever since, and we're making progress. We've worked with the town of Farmington, various historians, Preston Pierce, the Ontario County historian, SHPO. One of the things we did early on is establish guidelines on how we're going to do it. Mission, authenticity, audience, methods, resources. Got to have a mission statement. The 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum preserves, maintains, and interprets the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse as a national site of conscience and a cornerstone of historic movements for equal rights, social justice, and peace, including rights for Native Americans, African Americans, and women, inviting visitors to explore issues of equality and justice in their own lives. Authenticity. We're at a real place. It's not a theme park that someone created stories behind. Everything we talk about is true. And we make sure we have documented evidence for it. One of the things that I've noticed with this big building is it was kind of used like a community center at times. A lot of our photographs come from non-Quaker events. The opening picture is from a 4th of July celebration. A lot of our interior photos are from Grange Hall festivals. There was a Grange Hall in Pumpkin Hook, very small building. When they wanted to do their harvest festivals and so on, they did it at the 1816, which was great because people took pictures. And it shows us the details of on the elders' benches in the front, how the stairwell in the corner was, and things along those lines. And you stare at the picture long enough, you see a guy in a silver top hat. He's cut out of this one, but we try to keep it, try to do things for almost any group you can think of. We put on programs in a lot of different places. We even had a float in the parade one year. That's my mother-in-law. She was so excited to be in the parade. She looks happy, but we put on programs. I think we've done six this year so far, at various stages. And we rarely do them on site because we don't have a facility to do them in yet. It sounds initially like, well, you're going to put programs on somewhere else, like it's a bad thing, but it actually works out pretty good because we get exposed to a lot more audiences. This year, we did a program at the Orthodox Quaker Church. We did a program in Seneca Falls at the National Women's Rights Celebration. We did one at AME Zion Church in the city. We did one at Mount Hope Cemetery a couple weeks ago. I'm doing one here today. Like I said, John Van Leer kept everything. And we think we have 85 or more % of the building. A lot of it's not where it's supposed to be, but we have it. Even this ceiling that you're looking at in this photo, that's actually what you should be standing on if you're the first floor. The building had a gallery around 3 sides with an open ceiling in the center. And for a barn, that's not very convenient, so he went to the dirt floor and raised the first floor up. We're going to take it back down. This picture is one of my favorite shots we have. So when I was teaching, we would get posters sent in the mail to us. And you don't always look at them. You unroll it from the poster, take your stapler, and hang it up over the last one they sent you. So eventually you have a thick pile of posters on the wall. And this was up on my wall for a couple weeks before one day I just happened to look over and I thought, hey, that's the 1816 meeting house in the middle of the road. And this is me trying to take a picture of my son carrying the building down the road all by himself while my dad supervises. So I thought it was kind of cool that we got that. Somebody, Charles Lenhart, actually took this picture of it, sent it out, and there you go. The moving of the building was pretty cool. You can see underneath here, it's on big wheels, and there's steel beams run all the way through the building. Each of those axle assemblies has a hydraulic jack on it they can raise and lower, and there were guys inside the building at each one of those positions talking to the operator who had a belt of remote controls, and he could control the speed, angle, and elevation of each of those jacks independently as it was coming down the road. They had gone through and reframed and stabilized the building extensively. Probably the most frustrating part for me was these 2 power poles. $80,000 is what RG&E said, and we had to pay for them to have a couple guys on site when we got close to the intersection, run up, drop the wires, put a mat over them, drive the building over them, put them back up. And I'm not complaining about what they paid the guys, but I'm pretty sure the 4 guys didn't get $20,000 each. So that was a little bit of gouging. As I said, Jack Van Leer moved the building. So this is an overhead shot of where everything is. Your original location of the building is here. And then he moved it, or here, he moved it down to here, and then we took it down here for a lovely little ride. It took 2 days to go quarter mile. Went through a guy's garden. Oh, I was supposed to be working. Yes. The north bay that the lady drove over and the wind knocked down, through the New York Environmental Protection Fund, we were able to replace that. That is enclosed at this point, and when we finished the building, from the interior, you'll never know that it wasn't, that it was laying in a pile on the ground. This gives me a sense of how long we've been working on this building. That's me again, my dad, my mom, my wife. But this little guy in front of me is my boy, who's now my size. Graduated from college, and he started being involved in it. You know, you can see we've got the building stabilized there, so he was probably another foot shorter than that when he first got involved. And he loved going in the building, going through the rubble. I think some of the neighbors had stopped paying for garbage pickup and were just putting their junk in the building. So when we did the clean out, we filled 7 roll-off dumpsters. And a lot of the stuff you had to look at and say, is this an artifact or garbage? But if anything was in a hefty bag, which there were a lot of, I didn't go through those at all. We did find things like 35 or 40 television sets, probably not contemporary with the various movements connected. Some of them were pretty old. We gave them to the Radio TV Museum in Bloomfield. And other stuff went to ELPCO, like the hundreds of fluorescent light fixtures and other assorted things like that. There was still potato equipment, which sits in the back of my barn in case we want to show people how to bag and weigh potatoes someday. It's getting there. Appreciation on everything, everybody that helps with it. That's Helen Kirker. Helen was our first board president. Her grandson's involved with it now. She comes out when she can. Somewhere along those lines. So what's next? There we go. Built a nature trail. So I was off the board and such from the meeting house for quite a while because we were a travel hockey family. And if you are a travel hockey family, you don't do anything else. And you only get one shot to raise a kid. So I stepped back from it. When I came back on the board, my mother was on, and she mentioned we should build a nature trail. Somebody kind of laughed at her a little bit, and only I can laugh at my mom, nobody else can. And I didn't say a word. I've been in enough meetings to know the new guy shuts up. So when the meeting was over, I drove over to the meeting house, and I went and I walked where I thought a nature trail should go and saw that the deer agreed with me. So I decided to find out if I could actually do it. Called town officials and DEC, that Peter Inglesby there, to get their permission to do it, make sure we were within DEC regulations because there is some wetlands nearby. And there were things we had to do, like when we put a sign in the ground, it can't have a concrete base because that's permanent and things like that. I fired up my 1964 Farmall 460. It has a 6-foot bucket on it. Any guesses how wide the trail is? I didn't take down a single live full-size tree. Unfortunately, the emerald ash borer did that for me. And it was mostly just clearing. But we now have a 1/4-mile long trail. It's nice. You know, I definitely picked fall foliage pictures to make it look extra nice, but it's, when I drive by it, I love seeing people on it. There's benches and signage, stuff to look at. Lots of benches, lots of rock piles. we have what we call pumpkin hook potatoes out our way. Technically, it's glacial till. So when the glacier stopped, it left all the rocks, and a lot of rocks. So when I was making the trail, where they had cleared rocks from the field, you just pile them up in the hedgerow. Well, I really couldn't have the trail go up and over a big pile of rocks, so I just busted through the hedgerow with the tractor and pushed them out of my way. And I realized I had made some little peninsulas. And what they became was places to put the benches. We have 9 benches in a quarter-mile trail. There's 8 signs. And the benches sit at the little peninsula. You look out into the woods, the wetlands, there's a creek there. The signage has Quakers, Native peoples, African Americans, and women's quotes connected to the building. All the benches were built by Eagle Scouts for their Eagle projects. We have 4 completed Eagle Scout projects on site. It's my mom and dad and Robin Newell, one of our board members, enjoying a bench. Those benches they were sitting on, and you can see them again in the top section, are replicas of the original pews in the building. The kid that came over and wanted to talk about it, I said, I'm thinking this would be nice for the nature trail. He's like, okay, I'll do that. And him and his uncle came over and measured. And every other meeting I had with this boy was about what we were going to eat at his Eagle celebration. That's what his main focus was. And he had me fully convinced we were going to have a garbage plate buffet. So I show up ready for a garbage plate buffet and find a plate of broccoli. Broccoli and carrots. Not stuff you would find in a garbage plate. I was going to take his Eagle Scout back, but apparently you can't do that. But it's a lot of fun working with these guys, and I talked to another boy yesterday who's interested in his Eagle project, and so we're trying to come up with something else we can do separate from the building. I thought maybe a variety of different types of bird houses and a bat house along the trail. That was one of the signs I talked about. There's 8 of those, and the mounting hardware for all 8 signs and the installation was the 3rd Eagle project on the trail. The signs themselves, I guess we crowdsourced our choices. We put out a list of quotes for each of the 4 groups connected to the meeting house and did it as an online survey. Andy Purdy, who teaches social studies at Victor, put it out to his classes, and they all went through. And the quotes that we picked, they picked. So that was a nice community connection for it. And that would be my wife. I don't remember what she's looking at. She did tell me not to put her in this presentation, but after 40-something years, she knows better than to tell me that. Talked about the programs earlier. They're kind of fun to do. The building itself. We won $483,727 from the National Park Service, which we were then able to use as a matching fund for a grant from the New York State Environmental Protection of almost the same amount. So we have just under $1 million in grant money to begin the exterior restoration. That won't cover the interior, but it'll replace the roof, the windows, the clapboards, doors, and the associated framework to go with it. Been working on the site plan. The entrance, buses will be able to pull in here. There'll be a little offload patio type area with some benches, signage. If you have a bus, drop her right down in here. After everybody's unloaded, pull out. You can loop around, do whatever you like. The committee building, which we haven't talked much about, will be on the end here. It's a work in progress. We have electricity, sort of. So I was the Victor cross country coach, and Kristen Pellerite ran for me. And her dad, Joe, worked at O'Connell Electric for a long, long time. And I thought, O'Connell Electric's one of the larger electrical contractors on the East Coast. I only needed like 150 feet of wire and some connections, and I thought they might have some of that left over from jobs. So I reached out to Joe and talked to him about it, and he said, let's see what we can do, right when the pandemic started. So he got what he could. My friend Jerry Johnston, who donated the electrical work, made a materials list, because I didn't know what we needed. Sent it to Joe. He went through, found everything in their warehouses that was just leftovers from other jobs. Whatever they didn't have, they called Graybar, who's an electrical equipment contractor that makes a lot of money from O'Connell. And O'Connell said to them, you're going to donate the rest of this to this meeting house. And what was interesting, the hardest thing to get from any of them was the box that the meter goes in. Every electrical company uses a slightly different one. And to get an RG&E box took like 6 months compared to everything else. Jerry Johnston, who grew up right up here on, just past Victorwood, and his daughter Maeve. That's my mom and dad again. They keep appearing in this, but they've been involved in it so long, I decided they had to be the first ones to turn a light on. My mom thought it was wonderful. My dad thought it was stupid. I should have just turned the lights on anyways. So I got exactly the reaction I expected, and I think he liked it better and he was willing to let on. The site plan I showed you a minute ago cost like $20,000. I drew the site plan for the electrical for a lot less than that. I used a plastic cutting board and a pencil, and that is a legal document now. The committee building, little wing building off the side. When Van Leer moved the building down the hill, local lore says he moved the elders building to the south and put his daughters in it to live. We do plan on restoring it. Like it says, it'll be our bathrooms, mechanicals, meeting rooms, archival storage. We'll have a basement on it. The Rulia and Phyllis Van Leer lived in the building. This is what we think was the meeting house. One of the things that kind of follows is this window and this window are closer together than this one and that one. And if you look here, it's the same on that building. Obviously, they did some expansion on it, but it burned in 1989, so we don't have any way to confirm it at this point. This random drawing, again, is my figuring. I went over and I measured everything I could find in the pictures, and I posted that online for people to come up with what they thought the dimensions of this building were, because we didn't have a record of it. I got a lot of response to it. Several people thought that the little building was bigger than the big building, so I knew they probably weren't right. A friend of mine is a historical architect, and he pointed out what's called the building shadow from where you remove a building. And from that, he figured out it's about a 24 by 36 building. And I thought, well, that makes sense. So we're going to build one about that size. Going to put geothermal in. We're currently working on a parking lot and driveway. We've got at least 70 10-wheeler loads of millings from County Road 8 when they resurface that this summer. In the back of the room is this model. I said to I heard one of our board members was a woodworker. I said, have you ever built a dollhouse? He goes, no, but it sounds interesting. I got an idea for you. And that is actually built out of wood from the meeting house. So it's kind of cool. And he decided in the middle of this project to build a real house for himself. So this got put on hold a little bit, but it will have a roof and walls on three walls and one side of the roof, and the back side will be open so you can see the interior. They held Quaker Days every June, that's when their yearly meeting was. We're trying to maintain that tradition, and a tradition where it does involve everybody, including events for kids and their families. Thank you to everybody that Thank you for the invitation to share this today. If there's any questions, ask. Our social media information is there. The email address is on our website, Instagram, Facebook, and there are copies of various things in the back of the room. So, thank you for having me.